Hey guys, so I'm on my new bed and I am doing a speech for my second block class. We're doing a multi-genre project, and so I have a 3-minute speech that I wrote for that. It is about abuse and all that cool stuff, so I just need to test it to see if it's short enough. I think it will be, but knowing me, my goal is that it's no longer than 5 minutes at least, because, at most 5 minutes, because there's 30 kids that have to go in 2 days, and if my speech is too long and it's the reason someone else can't go, I don't want to be responsible for them having not as good of a grade because they weren't able to go in class. So, I'm gonna try and actually follow the rules, even though I have 10 note cards, but I lost my big note card, so this is the amount of information that I can fit on a small note card, and I'm not used to it. And it's annoying and I don't like it. So I'm gonna get started with that. Some stereotypes you may hear or misconceptions you may hear about people in abusive relationships are: the abuser is mentally ill, it's always physical abuse, or when it is emotional abuse, it's not that bad. If the abuse was so bad, why didn't the person say something? Today, we're going to be talking about stereotypes and stigma around abuse. I am credible to talk about this because I have had personal experience with abusive relationships, and I've also done some research for this project. Statistically, 10 people in this class will be abused in an intimate relationship because 1 in 3 people is. There should be more education about abuse and avoidance of stereotypes, and today, to prove that to you, I'm going to show you the problem of stigma and stereotypes around abusive relationships, the cause, which I believe is in education, and the solution, which is more education. Let's begin with the problem. Stereotypes, stigma, and misconceptions about people in abusive relationships. Here are some more examples. The person who was abused provoked the abuser. It was a one-time thing and the abuser was sorry. It's a private matter and we shouldn't get involved. Why doesn't the person who's being abused just leave? They're choosing to stay. Doesn't that mean they must want what's happening to them? This kind of thinking hinders people from getting out of bad relationships and makes them end up with terrible side effects, such as increasing their victims' risk of substance abuse, eating disorders, risky sexual behavior, and future domestic violence. It can also increase the risk of them having chronic pain, trouble sleeping, poor mental health, trouble in outside relationships, and greatly makes it much more difficult for them to trust others. Why is this happening? Why are people saying these things that make it harder for people to get out of abusive relationships? A huge reason, I think, is in education. And I emailed Ms. Carfinger, the health teacher. She only teaches 9th grade health, but she told me a little list of what they do to talk about abusive relationships. They talk about healthy versus unhealthy relationships, assertive communication using iMessages, sexual assault recovery program, which has prevention and resources available if sexual abuse occurs, and they talk about family services. Some other things that can cause stigmas about abuse are the promotion of the stereotypes and stigmas on the internet and in social media, and also lack of critical thinking skills, empathy, and the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes. So, how can we solve this problem? What can we do to change this problem? I think some solutions could be more education. We should have some special classes or training courses that people can go to learn to identify the signs and what to do if they think their friend is in an abusive relationship or if they think they are. We need to stop stereotypes. We need to call it out when we see it in conversation and online, and we need to avoid gossiping and spreading rumors. And we need to use critical thinking and empathy. How do we think that the person feels? What do we think their theories on the question, what theories do we have about the answer to the question we're about to ask? Like, for instance, if you ask, why don't you leave? Try thinking about the answers they might give. For instance, they are in love with the person. They think that the situation might get better. They have kids with the person, they live with that person, they share a car with that person, their money is together, or they don't have a lot of support from outside resources. To conclude, there should be more education about abuse, and we should avoid to use stereotypes. We looked at the problem, which is stigma around abuse. which the cause for is in education, and the solution for would be to educate. We need to be more aware of situations that many people deal with and have to go through and be sensitive to them. We should petition to add more education about abusive relationships, the many types of abuse, warning signs, likely victims, etc. to the school curriculum, or at least as an optional course. Thank you. It's always physical abuse, or when it is emotional abuse, it isn't that bad. This is just one of the many stigmas and stereotypes there are about abusive relationships. Today, that's what we're going to be talking about. I'm credible to talk about this because I have personal experience with this topic, and I've also done research for this project. Statistically, 10 people in this classroom have or will be abused in an intimate relationship. There should be more education about abuse and avoidance of stereotypes, and to prove that to you today, we're going to be looking at a problem, cause, and solution. The problem is stigma and stereotypes around abusive relationships. The cause, I believe, is in education, and the solution would be more education. First, let's look at the problem. Stereotypes, stigma, and misconceptions about people in abusive relationships. Some of which are, that's a private matter and we shouldn't get involved, or why don't they just leave? They're choosing to stay. Doesn't that mean they must want what's happening to them? This kind of thinking hinders people from getting out of bad relationships, and they end up with these side effects. It can increase victims' risk of substance abuse, eating disorders, risky sexual behavior, future domestic violence, chronic pain, trouble sleeping, poor mental health, trouble in outside relationships, and have difficulty trusting others. I emailed Ms. Carpfinger, who is the 9th grade health teacher. She said that they have a few days about abuse in their curriculum, but very much not enough, and there should be more awareness of it. Another cause would be the promotion of these stereotypes on the internet and lack of critical thinking skills, empathy, and the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes that many people seem to have. My theory for a solution would be more education, special classes and training courses that could help with this, and identifying the signs and what to do if you think your friend is in an abusive relationship. Another thing would be stopping stereotypes, calling it out in conversation and on the internet, and also avoiding gossip and rumor spreading. A third thing could be using critical thinking and empathy. How do you think this person feels? Before you ask them a question, think about what their possible answers could be, or their reasons for their decision. To conclude, there should be more education about abuse, and we should avoid using stereotypes. I have told you about the stigma around stereotypes and abuse. I have explained the cause, which is in education, and I have suggested a solution, which is more education. We need to be more aware of situations many people deal with and have to go through and be sensitive to them. I think that we should petition to add more education about abusive relationships, the many types of abuse, warning signs, likely victims, and etc. to the school curriculum, or at least an optional course that many people can take. Thank you.
It's always physical abuse. Emotional abuse isn't that bad. These are just some examples of stereotypes people have around the victims of abuse. I have personal experience and I've done a lot of research on this topic. Statistically, 10 people in this class have or will be abused in an intimate relationship. My thesis is that there should be more education about abuse and avoidance of stereotypes. Today we'll be looking at the problem, which is stigma and stereotypes around abusive relationships. The cause, more education. The cause, less education, and the thing, more education. First, let's start with the problem. Stereotypes, stigma, and misconceptions about people in abusive relationships. Here are some more examples. That's a private matter and we shouldn't get involved. Why don't they just leave? They're choosing to stay. Doesn't that mean they must want what's happening to them? This kind of thinking hinders people from getting out of bad relationships, and then they end up with these side effects. Although some people might say that this sort of thing isn't a problem, it causes this sort of thing. It can increase a victim's risk of substance abuse, eating disorders, risky sexual behavior, or future domestic violence. It can also increase their risk for chronic pain, trouble sleeping, poor mental health, trouble in outside relationships, and they can have difficulty trusting others. Now let's look at the cause. I believe the cause is in education. Ms. Carpfinger, I emailed her about this, and she explained to me some of the stuff that they talk about in 9th grade health class. But they only talk about it for about 2 days. They don't talk about it a lot, and she agrees with me that there needs to be more education. Some other causes are promotion of stereotypes on the internet and lack of critical thinking skills, empathy, and just putting ourselves in their shoes that in all of us. I believe the solution would be more education. We should have special classes or training courses to help identify the signs and what to do if you think your friend is in an abusive relationship. We should stop stereotypes. We need to call it out when in conversation and online. And we need to avoid gossip and rumor spreading. We also need to use critical thinking and empathy. How do we think that they feel in this situation, and what do you think their answer to the question is going to be before you ask it? Because if you think that it's a rude question, just don't ask the question. To conclude, there should be more education about abuse and the avoidance of stereotypes. Stigma. Today I talked to you about the stigma in education and that we need to educate people more. We need to be more aware of situations that many people deal with and have to go through and be sensitive to them. In conclusion, I would ask you to petition to add more education about abusive relationships, the many types of abuse, warning signs, likely victims, etc. to the school curriculum, or at least as an optional course. Thank you.